Go. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Q&A Hour. My name is Pat Flynn. I'm here, and I'm joined by a couple special guests who I'll introduce in just a second. But I'm really excited because we're going to be talking about podcasting today. As you might know, we're launching Power Up Podcasting once again at actually the lowest price it's been since the launch. And the reason for that is we just had a very, very successful Pitch Your Pod contest with hundreds of people getting out of their comfort zone, dropping us a little audio file to pitch their show. We've had some winners. We've had a lot of people ask questions. Is this even right for me to go to the next level? What's the experience like being in the course? And also just some general questions about podcasts that I want to answer for you. So make sure to get your questions ready. If you do have a question and you're live on YouTube right now, thank you for being here and watching. We're going to go for about an hour, and I will go quickly if there's a lot of questions. If not, we can definitely go deeper. But again, I appreciate you being here. But before we get into that, I want to introduce a couple special guests we have from Team SPI. We have Known in the house. You might have interacted with him in the Academy or within SPI Pro, or maybe even via email. Known, how are you, my friend? Thank you so much for being here today.
I'm doing great, Pat. So happy to be here, talk podcasting. So happy to see you. So happy to see Kelly.
Yes.
How are you, Kelly?
Let's bring Kelly on. How are you, Kelly?
I'm great. Great to be with y'all.
Kelly, tell us a little bit about yourself. You have gone through Power Up Podcasting, in fact, which means you have a podcast. Tell us about your show. What is it about?
Sure. Well, my podcast is called Crazy Good Vintage, and it kind of says in the name what it is. We are passionate about vintage, all topics vintage. We've had folks from the Corning Glass Museum talking about the history of Pyrex. We just did an awesome episode with Vintage Camper Trailers magazine about the history of vintage campers. So we love vintage. And it says it in my name. And there's my name, Crazy Good Vintage.
So everybody should check out Crazy Good Vintage, anywhere you can get podcasts, obviously. When you say vintage, it makes me think of like vintage Pokemon cards, which is, I don't know if you've had an episode about that yet, but there could be some collaboration there.
That's a great idea.
Tell me a little bit about, okay, so you're getting access to these amazing people. Tell me what it's been like to bring them on the show and have a conversation with them. What has that led to?
Well, I'll tell you, the episode that launched yesterday is a perfect example of how important it is to have a great, exciting guest and being able to leverage them strategically, which you taught me how important that was. So this guest has, gosh, I'm going to say between 800,000 and 900,000 followers across all of their mediums. And now they're talking about my pipe. They actually reached out to me, by the way. They reached out to me and said, hey, we want to be on your podcast, which was very exciting. And now we've got them talking about the show, and it's exciting to see it happen.
That's so awesome. That's one of my favorite parts about podcasting is the relationships you could build. I know some students have come in to basically say, I don't care if I get listeners. I just want a platform to chat with these amazing people with. And of course, you do get listeners as well. Before we start answering questions, we're very close to that, but we do have our other special guest in. Her name is Deanne, and she's awesome. Let's pin her in here. Hey, Deanne, welcome into the Q&A hour about podcasting. Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here. Yeah, it's exciting.
And you are a former or current and former, because you never really leave the course once you have access to it. But you went through Power Up Podcasting. Tell us what you created through that experience.
Yeah, I was really lucky to be in person with you to do Power Up Podcasting with a group of just an amazing cohort. So that was what I needed to get off the ground, because I was thinking about it and considering, and you made us set goals, and I stuck to them. I was like, okay, Pat says, give us a date you want to release, and this is the process to get there. And I did it, and it became a really successful process for me that I've used in other things too.
Give us a shout out. What's your show so people can go find it, Deanne?
Yeah, it's called Alopecia Life. And it's about, I talk to people about their autoimmune hair loss. So it's something that maybe there's only, I'm being pretty liberal when I say there's a handful of people that do podcasts about this. I mean, I'm pretty much the longest running one. And I'm going on 3 years now. And so it's kind of one of those things that you go, yeah, if it's not out there, you need to make it available for people, and having a resource that I never had for myself too, especially.
Yeah, that's so great and commendable. And you're helping to change lives and make people feel like they're not alone in this process, which is super great. And so let's go to the questions. I'm just going to ask questions or answer questions that are being asked in the chat. I'll see if you have anything to add. If not, we'll move on to the next. And then we'll pause every once in a while to talk more about if you are going to take Power Up Podcasting, what would be the best way to approach it and how to get the most out of it and that sort of thing. So let me go into, I won't be able to pop up the questions here, but I'll read them out loud. This one is coming in from Anna, and let me bring the computer closer for my eyeballs. Is it necessary to confirm first if my audience are podcast listeners before diving into and starting a podcast, or can you convert them into podcast listeners? There is definitely a huge migration from people consuming content elsewhere into the podcasting space. And so it's now more than ever easier to convert people should they not already be podcast listeners. Although I do think it's important to know, are they already listening to shows? And this is the cool thing because you can find other competitive shows. Deanne was just mentioning that she's likely one of the only ones, and there are a handful, maybe some have started and stopped. It's good to know that because you can get a reaction. You can read the reviews and ratings of those existing shows to see how that goes down. Let's see. Kelly, did you do any like competitor research or understanding of who the audience was before starting your podcast?
I did a little bit, and that was actually very encouraging for me. I was surprised to see there wasn't anybody out there quite like me. Mm-hmm. So that gave me a little confidence, but absolutely, I wanted to see what was out there, what their listeners were saying as far as feedback for them. So sure. I totally did my research.
Now let's talk about it on the other side of things, right? What if you find in your research that there are dozens, maybe hundreds of podcasts talking about the same thing, right? That could also provide a level of, oh, I'm kind of late to the game here. But I actually love that because now you have more data to prove that, yes, there is a market for this type of information. 2, you can use the ratings and reviews to understand what people like and dislike. And you can find out how you and your superpowers might complement the existing shows so you can get invited on those shows. That's the other cool thing is you can be a guest on another podcast to grow your podcast. It's one of the best ways to grow. Speaking of superpowers, it's really important to know kind of what you can bring to the table. So Deanne, when you created your show, how are you thinking about like what you could offer that space and to these people who needed a voice in this area?
Yeah, I really feel like there's so much you can say as a podcast host, right? And then there's all of this great information that's available out there from other people. And so I have an interview style, and I interview people who can give different perspectives on hair loss and how they handled it and what they're doing to raise awareness. Because I have a lot of different listeners. I have parents who have children with alopecia, right? And they want to know how to introduce it into school or in the community. And so we have ideas about that. We also have ideas on how to live with methods that actually help your stress levels. And all these things are great for adults and children. So we kind of hit on a lot of different things, and it's not like a serious down topic, right? I mean, it can be great. It's really wonderful when people realize that, yeah, it's not all about having to feel a certain way about our hair loss and kind of embracing it and going into the world however we wish to go, and it's not about going completely like me bald. It's people choose to wear wigs and hats and scarves, and that's wonderful. It's just having options and choices. So I think that having options and choices and things like that and relaying that to the world and having them hear it is really important.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of a lot of my show because on the podcast, Smart Passive Income, I invite a lot of different kinds of business owners on, and it's not about necessarily listening to every show and doing all the things that everybody says. It's being able to pick and choose from the things that you resonate with most, right? So that's really interesting. And then the storytelling that goes behind that, which Kelly, I know that is big in the vintage world, is just the stories behind these things. So pull out stories whenever you can, no matter what kind of show you have, whether it's a solo show or you're bringing guests on. Okay, let's get to some more questions. There's a few coming in. There was a question earlier that I saw. I don't know who asked it, but Noan, I saw you addressed it with relation to copywriting. Copywriting is an amazing skill to be able to be convincing with the words that you use in terms of text. You can do that with your voice as well in terms of how you position something and how you mention something or get a person to click somewhere or go somewhere. But as far as like a necessary skill, honestly, you're probably going to learn more just by doing and figuring out what works along the way. Would you both agree with that as far as like the learning comes from doing?
Definitely. And I'll tell you, I'm, almost 58 years old. This was way out of my comfort zone. Huge, huge, huge. And it took every bit of strength I had just to go through the course. I was afraid I wouldn't understand it. I was afraid it would be overwhelming to me. And it was just one of I also own an online vintage business. So it was one of these goals for my business to take it to that next level, kind of brand it. And I said, I need to give vintage information to folks. How do I do this? I want a podcast. Mm-hmm. I'm too old to learn how to podcast. I don't know. It really took me months to decide I need to do this. A friend of mine, another former student of yours, told me about you. She said, you have to do it. I said, okay. I forced myself out of my comfort zone. And it was really the best thing I ever did. You held my hand every step of the way.
That's so cool. Thank you so much for sharing that. Here's a question from Rich. How do I determine what success looks like in podcasting if financial gain is not the priority? Let me just address this really quick. And then, Noan, I want to go to you because you have a very important podcast as well for reasons that are beyond just like I'm trying to make as much money as I can from it, right? And for me, if money is the most important thing when creating your podcast, it's not going to work, in my opinion. I think that it works when you have a drive to help a certain group of people, and the money will come as a result of that, right? Your earnings are a byproduct of how well you serve your audience. Now, it's obviously important to learn the strategies to be able to monetize and how to do that. And we talk about that in Power Up Podcasting. But Noan, can you talk about the definition of success for a podcaster when it shouldn't be about just making a lot of money?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. It's something that I grapple with. I think it's pretty human to grapple with the concept of what success means, right? And I think it's important to like humanize what success means and really make it your own, because I think the systems at play in the world often sort of lead to a place where success is money, or success is achievement, or success is this or that. And I think when it comes to deciding what your success is personally, that's entirely yours. And that's exciting. That's empowering. You know, that's really beautiful. So for me, with my podcast, You Me Empathy, it's a mental health podcast. We talk about really hard stuff. What is crucial about it, and what I like about podcasting in general, is it's not about money. It's about building community and creating space for people to show up as they are. And how can we as humans foster that safety and ability to sort of embrace our capacity for empathy in these safe containers? Like, that's ultimately what it's about for me. It has led to some money and sort of audience growth and whatnot, but the leading thing is like, how can I serve? How can I build community and create safe spaces?
I love that. And with the power of a voice and a microphone, and the fact that people are listening to podcasts more than they're watching videos, not maybe overall, because there's way more videos than podcasts, but what I mean is during a session of listening, you have people for a half hour, an hour. That's huge, as opposed to a video that gets watched for 5 minutes is good. And that's just, the short attention spans are getting shorter, it seems. I don't know if you all feel the same way, but it does feel like that on my end. Okay, let's keep going here. 100 Watts and a Wire asks, I've been podcasting since 2015. 18 months ago, I added clips and live streams on YouTube. How would you handle streams? Unlist, cut up and post? Audio podcast is more popular at this point. Christian, this is a great question, Christian. I have a video recently where another YouTuber had mentioned that because I streamed live for a year, it did affect the growth of the YouTube channel. It wasn't a podcast per se, but it did affect the growth of the YouTube channel. But I don't regret it at all, because it did create, like what Noan just said, community, and that feeling of, I mean, there are people in here. I see Karma, who just left a super chat. Thank you for that. He was one of our members, and there are many more members here who were there with us during that time. But I would say with live streams, I would unlist them immediately, but then cut them up and turn them into nice little packages of talking about one particular topic that could be found in search or browse, put a really nice title and thumbnail into it. And the purpose is, yes, some of those people will find those videos who wouldn't have found your podcast otherwise, and then also subscribe. But there are other people who are going to see that and choose not to subscribe, but you're still able to serve them in that little clip. And that's what's really cool about this sort of YouTube world and how it mixes with podcasting right now. Dad Geek Darth says, what is your opinion on using Twitter Spaces for creating podcasts? So Twitter Spaces is a similar tool to Clubhouse, where you can create like an audio room and you can bring people in. And I believe that you can also record that and turn it into an audio. People have been doing that on Clubhouse. I think the most important thing is, after a person listens to that show, is there value there, right? There might be some interesting conversations that happen. I think that the trouble is and this is similar to if you do live streaming podcasting and then turn it into a pre-recorded one later, is that the best experience live is when there's interaction, right? Like when I mentioned Jillian here and Amazing Mr. Jesse and Anna and Karma and Tina and Anna. If I bring those live elements into a pre-recorded fashion, it makes those people who weren't there live kind of feel like they're left out. So you kind of have to navigate that a little bit, and Twitter Spaces is done live, but there are people who do that really well, who can make a conversation, even if it's with a person there live, still valuable for people listening on the other end, and that's what I would advise. Let's see. Primo says, I got everything to start recording a podcast. Not sure what I'm scared of or nervous of. How did you break apart that feeling if you ever experienced it? Okay, I want to ask both Kelly and Deanne this. So Deanne, maybe we could start with you in terms of when you started and you were scared. Well, first of all, let us know if you were scared, and then how did you overcome that?
I was really freaked out, actually. I did not care for the sound of my voice. I didn't know how that would translate through a microphone. And I also, all the things that I kind of feared were around editing and tech and stuff. And that, I recorded like 14 episodes and didn't edit any of them because I was so worried about it. And finally I was like, well, I got to actually release some of these. And so I started that process, and that kind of was a little bit bumpy, but it all worked out. And I actually have reviews on Apple Podcasts that talk about how my voice is like, makes people want to like feel like they're in a cozy pillow and things like that. So
agreed.
It's kind of a funny thing. It's not like you want to put people to sleep, but I'm glad that people feel comfortable listening.
Yeah, comforting.
Yeah,
it's comforting. Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, Kelly? When you started, how scared were you, and how did you finally get over that?
I was scared, but I just figured I just pushed myself forward. I loved the fact that it was on video. I could replay it over and over and over if I didn't understand something. So it was great. And it was a great tool for me every time I needed to refer back to it. So, and once you get through the first couple and you kind of start a groove, you get a little bit more confidence every little step of the way. And gosh, now I'm almost 20 episodes in. I never thought that would happen. And I'm psyched.
Nice. And Deanne, did you find that too, that after taking a couple modules in the course, it just started to flow a little bit better?
It definitely. Yeah. I love what Kelly said about referring back to it. If you have a question about it, if there's something you don't understand, sometimes you do actually have to do it, like you said, and then go, wait, maybe I didn't understand this right. And go back. And everything was just set up so perfectly that it was easy to do that.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Power Podcasting, available right now at the lowest price it's been since launch. If you go to smartpassiveincome.com/pup and go check it out. And this deal expires tomorrow. We wanted to offer one final chance here for people to get questions answered, because I know that many of you are still navigating as to whether or not this is right for you or not. But if it's not, we want it to be no regrets for you, right? And if it is, we want to welcome you in. Amazing Mr. Jesse offered a nice answer to that previous question too, with relation to getting started. Jesse said, I started recording just for myself. No one was going to hear it. I just did it to break the ice. And then I interviewed my son. We had a great chat about work. Nice. So just kind of getting your greases, put some grease on those wheels and let it going. That's awesome. Anna says, is it advisable to take the course and start a podcast simultaneously while building a new product or business? Yes and no. I think it depends. There are people who, while creating a new business, started a podcast to uncover that journey, to actually use the podcasting to market their new product. Books, physical products, new businesses, consultations, coaching, all kinds of people use podcasting to promote their business. And when you give people that ability to get to know you, when you give people that ability to hear your story and the why behind what you're creating, I mean, that's so powerful when it comes to marketing. It actually is a beautiful thing that you could use to promote something. But I do say that many people might use this as a distraction from other things that they know they need to do too. So I think you need to be very aware. You can get in the course now if you want to lock in that price and then use it later. You have a lifetime access. But again, I would leave that up to you. You can trade off weeks. Some people get through the course in a week and a half. Others take 6 months. It really just depends on you. Let's see. Looking for more questions here. We got a question from Claudia. Could you please say a bit about podcasting in the international markets, for example, Europe, monetizing their approach to using English as a non-native speaker? So there are, in fact, a lot of podcasts that do very well, even though English is not their primary language, number one. So we know that that's fact, all right? So it is possible to do very well as a non-native English speaker to do well in a podcasting space. Number two, as a side note, I know a lot of those people who have gotten so much better at English as a result of putting themselves behind the microphone and just having conversations and kind of consistently doing that, right? There's no better way to get to improve that. Number three, international markets are growing very fast. I know Mexico, for example, and a lot of Spanish speaking podcasts are doing very well now because they've just finally caught up like technology wise, and they're kind of getting into the podcasting space now. And many of them are using their native languages to grow because there are podcasts all over the world in native languages, but also English podcasts that target, those who might be from other countries work really well too. I know that there's, there was a pitch actually that I remember. No, and I don't know if you remember this from Pitch Your Pod, but there was a pitch related to somebody who was taking people out to different tours of France, right? Michelle, I think was her name. And she was talking about being a tourist in France and bringing that to the podcast space. So you can almost be there even if you weren't, and telling stories about that. And that was really amazing. So no, I don't think it can be a hindrance. In fact, it could also be, an advantage. I mean, I don't know about you, but I love listening to podcasts where I hear a really awesome accent. I just like can't not listen to those sometimes. There's a reason why I think Tom Holland is the best Spider-Man. Anyway, that's all I'm saying. Karma Cashflow. Hey, my friend, miss you. Nice to see you in here. Thanks again. I appreciate you, Karma. Okay, question from Alexander. How do you reach famous people to ask them to be on your podcast? Kelly, you've already mentioned that you've had some pretty big names in your space to come on your show. And one of them actually reached out to you, right? Which is pretty awesome. But how might you go about doing that?
Well, one of my very first episodes was I knew my listener would be loving Pyrex, and I knew that would start getting a lot of people on board. So I just thought, wow, who would be an impressive Pyrex guest to have on board? So I actually just, reached out to the folks at Corning Glassov Museum and said, I've got a brand new podcast. I want to interview somebody to tell us all about the history of Pyrex. They said, absolutely, we'd love to do it. And I think it's just a matter of asking sometimes.
Yeah. That's crazy. They said yes on the first go around.
What
if they said no? What would you have done?
You know what? I would have found a different Pyrex expert. I would have just kept going till I found an authority. Yeah. But I think too that, people like to be a part and like to see you succeed and like to tell their story. So I think if you're going to do it in a really positive environment, then who wouldn't want to do it?
I love that. Do you have any experience with that, Deanne, kind of reaching out to people that maybe you wouldn't have normally been able to get access to?
Yeah, I think that anybody who wants to talk about their hair loss is just, they are happy to talk to me. I kind of have a little bit of credibility behind me too. I have a book as well where I had to ask people for their stories. And so I have a coffee table book that has their photos and their stories. And so I have several celebrities in there. And anytime I talk to someone who might be a celebrity that wasn't featured in the book, they're really excited about it because the amount of support that was available to them as children or even as young adults, if they developed it then, just wasn't out there. And so I actually have never been told no when I've asked. I actually have an interview set up with Ayanna Presley for next week. So that's really exciting. So yeah, she's a US representative and she's all about raising awareness for it. So I'm excited about that.
That's so good. So tip number one, just ask, right? What's the worst that can happen? Which Kelly mentioned. Tip number two is connect with people who share the same passion as you, right? And there's going to be many people who might surprise you that would be willing to chat about this because they likely aren't able to or never have the opportunity to chat about it elsewhere. No, do you have perhaps another tip that you could offer for finding like really famous people to get on your show?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is true that having sort of quote unquote bigger names on a podcast can help your podcast grow. Like that is a fact. Mm-hmm. Or maybe it's not a fact. I don't think it's always true. What I think is important is being true to who you are. So as you reach out, this is how I do it. As I reach out to folks, I'm very honest and open about who I am, what the podcast is, what it means to me, how it's, this type of work has saved my life, literally. Appealing to emotion, appealing to my sense of authenticity and just how I show up in the world. Like, I don't want to ever come across as, and this is just me, but I don't want to ever come across as like salesy or pitchy or like, like icky in that way. Like, that's just not who I am. So I want it to be very clear in the way that I'm writing, in the way that I'm presenting myself. This person is them. This person is known. Yeah.
That's great. A few more tips for you. And this was whose questions was Alexander's question, but this is a question that I'm sure all of you are curious about. Obviously, if you know that famous person, that's going to be much easier, right? Because you already have a relationship. That always starts there. You might be surprised that in your space that you're in, some of your friends may already be considered a celebrity. So just keep that in mind. Number two, if you don't know the celebrity or famous person that you're looking to get access to, but you know somebody who does, or perhaps another podcaster who had once interviewed them or featured them, see if you can get a connection. An introduction always works better than a cold email or reach out. Number three, targeting those people when they have reason to be on many shows. For example, if they have a book coming out, right, they're going to be more likely to say yes. And if you show that you want to support them and get the word out there, well, they're trying to get it into as many places as possible. And I think a lot of people now understand the value of a host and their audience in terms of that relationship, even more so than a radio ad, right, is not going to perform as well as getting on a smaller podcast. A lot of people are privy to that now. Yes, Noan?
Yeah, because like the last piece, number three, folks who have books, Penguin and Random House and various publishers reach out to me weekly with like, hey, I have a guest who's, is publishing this book in a month, and it's, I feel super lucky. And I think it's just because I've been doing it for a spell and I've created a little niche or a space for myself.
Yeah.
But that happens too, and can happen for, I think, anyone really.
That's awesome. Saying hello to Jackie, My Castle Life is in the house, Filmtopia, Old Man Game, Ryan D. Thank you for that. I appreciate you, and a few other amazing people here. Carrot. Yeah, that's great. So thank you for that. With relation to the books also, like if you want to know when books are coming out and who you might be able to get access to, you can actually see on Amazon who has books coming out in a particular space. And it will say like, launches April 28th, 2022. Great. Reach out to them. Let them know that you know a book's coming out. They're going to be really impressed and go, well, who are you? You want to help? Like, I didn't even tell anybody this book's coming out. Like, let's chat. I'd love to get some support. So there you go. Filmtopia asked, does Power Up Podcasting open up on a cohort basis only, or are we allowed to join at any given time? So if you go to poweruppodcasting.com right now, you'll see that it's actually a sales page that's different than the one that'll pop up on the screen right now. That's the one that anybody can get into at any time, but it doesn't have the special bonus that's tied to this link that you're seeing on the screen right now. You can get in on any time. However, I will say that just like when you're going to college, if you go into college mid-semester, it's always harder because you're like by yourself and things are already happening. But if you go in with a group of people, there's always going to be, especially in office hours, people who are right at the same level as you, who you can share ideas with, you could see are on the same journey as you. So if you want to lock in that lower price and get in now with a cohort of other students, many people have already signed up, and the expiration date is tomorrow on that deal. It's $200 off the normal price. You can get in. If you need time and you want to wait, you can, but I cannot guarantee that it'll be during another special enrollment period like now. Karma Cashflow says, do you feel a solo show can be just as big as an interview style show? Absolutely, because it doesn't even really matter how the show is structured. It's just what kind of value is it providing? And there are many people who provide value in a solo fashion. I'm thinking of things like Hardcore History, which is an amazing podcast with just a single person who goes really deep into the likes of Genghis Khan and all this history. And it's just amazing. However, you could also have a history podcast with guests, just like Kelly does with her vintage stuff. And that could be very powerful. I do recommend, if you have a solo show, to explore the opportunity to bring guests on, because of those relationships that can be built. Some of my best friends now are a result of first connecting on a 45-minute conversation in a podcast. And Deanne, how have those interviews done with you? Are you keeping in touch with the people that you've had on the show, and how are those building into other things maybe?
Absolutely. I think that is one of the most important things, is really staying connected to the guests that you have on, because they're taking the time out of their life to share what's going on and to help others. And I think anytime I hear that somebody needs a service that they might be providing, or, need information about a book or anything like that, I'm like, hey, connect with this person. They'd be perfect. And I do that. I would say that's like 10% of my day is spent connecting people that I've had on podcasts or outside the community too. I think it's really important to value the time that they've already given you.
Oh, it's so important for sure.
Yeah.
And then Kelly, what was your decision as far as, choosing between solo episodes or interview? Have you done solo episodes within the first 20 that you've done?
Yeah, actually, I would say 16 of them are solo. So
wow, okay.
we have dives into, the history of Sears and Roebucks, or the history of F.W. Woolworths, things that would appeal to my vintage listeners. So, and the other feedback that we've gotten is we love the fact that they're bite-sized chunks. So most of my ones that are not interviews are no more than 20 minutes. And people have really responded to that. So I like gathering all the information from folks and then kind of going forward with it.
That's great. How do you plan a solo show? Because a guest coming on, you plan, but you ask questions and the show goes where it goes. With a solo show, how are you approaching that?
It's great. I just do my research on the computer about any of the topics that are really interesting to me as a vintage lover. And first of all, it's amazing how much I'm learning. I'm becoming this authority myself. But I just love sharing what's of interest to me with my listeners. And they have just been really responsive. So it's just a lot of just research. Yeah. But I would say I probably spend, and this has been my biggest challenge, is I'm probably spending 2 days a week right now dedicated to podcast specific stuff. So, and still having a vintage business, I got to figure out the balance there.
Right. And this is where getting it started is one thing, but being able to manage your time and learning about how to optimize your editing process. Dan, you mentioned the editing was like kind of tough at first. That's the hard part. But at the same time, when you have these relationships and you see the growth, and I mean, you have companies reaching out to you to want to be on your show or sponsor, it's like, wow, this is working. And that's really cool. And it's just about staying above water there. So, okay, let's go into the next questions from Amazing Mr. Jesse. How do you engage listeners when you're just getting started? I'm having trouble getting listeners to engage me in the first to answer. So the trouble with podcasting, the hard thing about it is, unlike here on YouTube, I can ask a question and I can literally see your answer. Like if I were to ask you where in the world you're watching this right now, let us know in the chat. That's engagement happening in real time. And yes, please do that. I'd love to know where you're at. But on a podcast, I can be like, hey, like, how do you even ask that? Because a person's listening while in the car or while on the go. So to me, engagement happens in two fashions with a podcast. First, it happens with you nailing a topic that they're very interested in and being able to speak to it to a point where they're going to sit up at the edge of their chair listening to your show, or, turn down the radio so they can fully listen to the earbud because you are talking about something that really matters to them. Engagement doesn't necessarily have to have a return, but at least an acceptance to what it is that you're talking about. And if you nail that topic, then that's part one of engagement is I'm receiving this information and I'm curious about it and I want to learn more, right? So that's part one. But part two is actually getting people to do something. And because a person's in a car or on a walk or on the go or walking their dog or whatever, it can be hard, right? So number one, try to make it as easy as possible. If it is simply, hey, let me know what you thought about this episode on Twitter, at Pat Flynn. That sometimes is literally the only thing, because if I add 5 more other call to actions, they're all going to be jumbled up and nobody's going to do anything, right? It could be, hey, join us in the Facebook group, right? We don't have a Facebook group right now, but we did at one point. And that for a while was an engaging point where people can then talk about the episode, right? And then in the group and in the community say, hey, what were your thoughts about episode 125? Leave your answers below. People coming in from the podcast see that and they can start engaging. It is definitely a challenge, but again, the big thing is make it as easy as possible. Known, how do you engage with your listeners in some way, shape, or form?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is important to have a home base, right? Like, where are you sending them? Pat, you mentioned Twitter, Facebook, or a social media place could sort of be the main sort of point of engagement or contact. I like to, I lead workshops and things like that. So I have a home base, for my business. And that's where I like to send people. And that's where, I mean, it's the Pat model. I have an email list where people can sign up for a newsletter, and I have, all of the show notes there. So I send them to this one place, and that's where they can sort of interact and engage. I haven't yet sort of delved into the like build a circle community like we have with SPI Pro or anything like that. But I'm thinking about it, right? Because like owning and sort of fostering your own little container is very appealing to me, and not having to deal with algorithms and etc. Right. But
Thank you for calling it the Pat method, though. That felt kind of cool. I didn't invent that though, but I appreciate that. We got a lot of questions.
You pay me, so
well, that's true.
And you paid me for that compliment. I'll give you
Yeah, there you go. There you go. I will write you a check later, actually. Anyway, let's keep going here. Ball Guy Sai says, I started 2 to 3 weeks ago, but I don't know who, if anyone, is listening. How do I find out? Very simply, you can go into your podcast host to see what the numbers are. Now, obviously, there's a difference between somebody clicking play and then, who knows what happens after that. And of course, somebody who's engaged who then reaches out to you to say thank you and I love that episode or has some feedback for you. So offering ways for people to engage elsewhere, like Known was just saying, is important, but also just looking at your numbers. And when you look at the numbers, remember, those are actual human beings who have played your show, who have a life, who have other things that they could have done, who've chose to listen to you. I mean, that's so powerful. And I often worry because a lot of people I talk to who are students of mine and elsewhere go, oh, I only have, 500 downloads this past month. And I see all these other people who have tens of thousands of downloads. I guess I must not be successful. Well, what if you every month had 500 people in a room and you were chatting with them? Would that not be incredibly powerful and empowering? That's just a mindset that you have to have with your numbers, because you have to compare you to you. You to you last week, you to your last episode. That sort of thing is really important. So Kelly, I'd love to ask you with regards to like the numbers part of this.
Yeah.
How are you approaching the numbers, and is that hard, or do you even look at them at all?
Oh my God, I look at them every hour when they drop.
Okay.
I am like one of those crazy kinds of people.
Yeah.
So, I come from a sales and marketing background, so I live by numbers. So that has been my most challenging part is, how come I only had 500 this week or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
And, but for me, I need little wins every day. If I get a rating today, if I get a review, if I just see some kind of progress, the fact that I'm sitting here talking to y'all, that will be great for a couple of weeks. So I get all these little positive steps that keep me going. And that's what I really have to focus on. All of the success I've had in my career didn't happen overnight. It's an investment. You got to grow it. You got to, nurture it, and it'll pay off.
Love it. Dean, how about you? I'd love to hear your thoughts on like the numbers and the statistics of all this.
Yes. So in the beginning, I was really into being on Buzzsprout constantly, checking my stats, checking my stats. And it was making me a little loopy. So I thought, you know what, I got to stop doing that, because it, like you said, it matters. But like you said, if I get one response, I had an episode about tattooed eyebrows, and something that I don't use myself, but I know that my people want to hear about that, right? And I had a woman who engages occasionally on Facebook, and she said, I have had alopecia for 50 years and I never knew about this type of product, and it's made a huge difference, right?
Wow.
And that's one person. It's not 50 people saying, wow, this was great, this was wonderful. I need those one comments to actually know that people are hearing what I'm saying, not just listening, right? And hearing what content I'm bringing them and value that's coming to them. And you never know who it's going to hit, right? So you talk about a lot of different, topics, and you just hope that they hit somebody right in the heart. So
yeah. Love that. Thank you for that, Dan. And focusing even on one result is important. The numbers are important, right? There are a number of things you can analyze. The trends. Are we growing up or are we growing down? And what can we do to mix things up a little bit? Which episodes pop? I don't know if you've had enough episodes yet to see like spikes, like, wow, that one episode, just like something happened there. Maybe we need to do a part 2 of that, or, you can analyze your statistics in that way. Okay. We're going to go for a quick 10-minute lightning round session. to speed through some of these. So don't mind me if I'm just kind of jamming here, everybody. So, and again, we have Deanne and Kelly and Noan here who are helping us through this. And again, if you are interested in taking the podcasting course, which both Kelly and Deanne took, you can go to smartpassiveincome.com/pup. There's a special deal going on right now for $200 off. That's the lowest price it's been since the launch in 2017. This is the 2.0 version with all the latest stuff, and that is there to help you. All right, question from Pile Driver Finisher. Sounds like a wrestling thing. Can I use podcasting to start a sort of commentary style of podcasting towards sports, football, MMA, etc.? Absolutely. There's a lot of people who create sport-based podcasts, and I remember when I was into fantasy football, obviously that's happening every week, although it's almost Super Bowl time. We'll see what happens. That'll be fun. But yeah, I would listen every week because they had so much good commentary about the stuff that just happened, right? Whether they came out with it the day after or midweek, didn't matter. I was just so interested in that topic that I wanted this person's opinion, who I happened to stumble across in the fantasy football space. So yeah, absolutely. The hard thing about that is it's more difficult to batch process your podcast episodes, right? If you were doing sports stuff that hasn't happened yet, it's going to be impossible to create next week's episode until this sporting event happens first, right? So that would be the only, not drawback, but just something to keep in mind. So if that was the case, you'd want to make sure your systems are in place so that maybe you are doing a commentary as soon as that thing ends, or even during it, and then you can pop it up sooner to reduce that friction. Underdog Training and Onboarding says, do office hours in the course have pre-planned content like this session? No, it's always whoever has questions asks in a Zoom call once a week. It's for an hour and a half to 2 hours. And to your second question here, do you ever fail to answer questions due to lack of time? Never have failed. And I've gone through upwards of 100 questions during that time period before. And what's really neat about that, and why we offer that, and that's just baked into the price, is because when I first started online courses, it was literally 2 questions I had that was either the decision to like stop and never move forward, or I got the help I needed, which I did, to break through that trouble and move forward. So I always, since the beginning, have offered office hours, because I know even just answering one question can change everything. How much money, based on the tools I imagine you'll recommend, will it take to get a podcast up and running in addition to the course? It's a great question. So you could spend tens of thousands of dollars on equipment, microphones. Like this microphone here is $400. It's from Heil, but it also connects to a 300 box that goes into the computer that then plugs into another box. That it's like crazy. I don't teach you that way. Some broadcasters have commented about the fact that I don't teach the best audio quality. That's not my goal. My goal is to get you up and running on a podcast with the least amount possible. And so it would cost about $100 or less with the equipment, the microphone, and the hosting program. Like that is it, in addition to the cost of the course. Obviously, if you have mics already, you could potentially use those, but it's not a lot compared to what a lot of other people say. And that's a great question, because you didn't know if you'd have to spend another $1,000 on equipment in order to do this. You don't. Next question from BJC. Question: I entered your Pitch Your Pod contest with facts and obscured reality. Is there a way to know how many votes I received? We're not sharing the number of votes because that doesn't really matter. The truth is the fact that everybody got votes. Everybody who participated in Pitch Your Pod is a winner, because you got out of your comfort zone and you created something, and then you can take that to the next level. So the voting, the number of votes are irrelevant. So we just decided not to share that. Dilder, what transcript software are you using? Is it just the one used by YouTube or your own? So it's not YouTube because we don't post on YouTube first to then collect that transcript, but we used a number of things before. We used Rev, which was a very expensive but human-based transcription service. There's other automated ones now that work really well, including Otter.ai and even one called Descript, which I don't know if you've heard of Descript, but it's an amazing tool that kind of like is revolutionary, because many people I know are actually recording their show on Descript. And then to save time on editing, the cool thing is it automatically gives you a transcript of your audio. But in order to edit your audio, you just delete those parts of the written transcript and the audio squishes together. It's like, what? How does that happen? And it's
wild.
Like pretty darn good. It's pretty darn good. There's also a way for you to record your voice. And if you forgot to say something, you could type it out and it will say it in your voice. Now that's a little scary, but also pretty cool if you forgot to say something. So there's a lot of tools out there that can offer transcripts for you. Dilder was asking the same thing. Let's see. Filmtopia says, considering my Filmtopia, the podcast, will be an extension of my YouTube channel and brand, how should I approach my podcast cover art? Should it be the same as a logo I have on all socials or different? That's an interesting question. On a podcast, I mean, Kelly and Deanne, you know this, the only thing artwork-wise you need to worry about is just your cover for your show. And that's all we really have to work with. I mean, that's actually, I'm grateful for that, because if it was like YouTube and I had to create a different thumbnail for every episode, I mean, that would be a lot of work. So the title of your episodes matter a lot, because that's oftentimes the first thing people are going to see. But the artwork is what you have to work with. And I feel like if you already have a brand elsewhere, bringing that, at least elements of that brand, into your podcast artwork is going to be important. Deanne, how did you approach your artwork for your show? Did you commission somebody for that, or did you create it on your own? And if so, what tools did you use?
Well, you actually provided someone at the live course to help with that. You did.
we have resources to help out those who need help. So,
yeah. And she did a wonderful job. It took a little bit longer than I had anticipated. So I went in and just started going, and I used some of my own artwork, and then just a standard background. It was just a color and then a font for the name of it and with who I was. And each episode, though, I change the background color. So I have a half of my face is there, and then the other half has my name and a little bit about the episode. So I usually change the background color, and it might actually match, the colors that someone is working with. If it's a nonprofit, if it's purple and yellow. So I do that.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. So I kind of like to do that. And it's so easy because I do it all in Canva, and it takes maybe 5 minutes. It's not anything kind of crazy.
Yeah, that's cool. Not many people do that, but that way every individual episode does have a little bit of a mark there. Kelly, how about you with your artwork? How did you approach it?
I keep the same artwork. I really like our brand. We've gotten so much. I hate to just keep showing you my t-shirt, but I'm going to because it's appropriate.
No, that's all right.
But it's a super cool logo. It's very vintagey looking. Yeah. And we actually have people who want to buy t-shirts. So that's my next step. I'm going to be opening a little shop. So
let's go
on the website. So, it's funny what evolves from, the first step.
And you do create fans with your show. People tune in all the time. People want to support you. And there's some amazing things that can happen. Nona, I know you have some merch and stickers as well. Do you use a particular service for all that stuff to make it easy for you?
I mean, I use like some local folks who created the stuff. And then I use Squarespace Commerce for all my merch.
Cool. Yeah. And there's other places like Sticker Mule or Custom Ink, I think, is another one that you can kind of get those things created.
Sticker Ninja is a good one for stickers.
Sticker Ninja. Okay, I like that name better.
This company, Night Owls, based in Houston. They do some good custom work. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. All right, let's keep going. From Brandon, is motivational/inspiration a good topic for podcasting? All I have is my backstory and the stuff I've been through to share with others. Your story is very important. I mean, that no matter what podcast you create should be a part of your show. Now, in terms of motivation and inspiration, I think that plus a particular target market or audience is going to be the key. Motivation in and of itself is a huge industry. And if you were to just create a motivational podcast, it's going to be tough for people to go, okay, well, why should I go to Brandon specifically for motivation versus, whoever else you want to include in there, or a lot of these other people. Perhaps it's, for example, motivation for new parents, motivation for authors, motivation for marathon runners. Right now, even though it's a smaller group of people, you're actually able to more get in tune with them because they go, wow, Brandon, you are speaking directly to me. Right. So I would pick a particular group and start there, and then you can expand out if you'd like. And that would be an easier way to cut through the noise. Dilder says, I already have a podcast, about 50 episodes and about 150 per episode. That's awesome. Actually, 150 people per room is amazing. I would like to increase my numbers. Is this a course for me to get or more for newbies? Dilder, you're beyond this course right now. If you have 50 episodes and you're getting 100 downloads per episode, I would say that there's some things that you can do to amplify the growth of your show. And you might actually consider our other course called Amped Up Podcasting. But for right now, I would say, no, don't get into Power Up Podcasting because you already have a show up and running. And now it's just, how do we get more people to find it? And how do we get more people to talk about it as well? I do see a couple super chats that have come in. Thank you so much for that. First one coming in from Scott, and there was one from Hafoto. Thank you both so much for that. Totally unnecessary, but I appreciate it. I see it, and I love you for that. Let's keep going here. All right. Does the course cover equipment types? Absolutely. We give you a few different options. We have like a economy model, we have a mid-level model, and some other things to help you with that for sure. We show you how to put it together. Like literally this goes here and press this button.
So helpful.
Thank you. Yeah. No, that would have been helpful for me too. Question. I started my podcast in February, audio only. I started posting my podcast and videos in September on YouTube with more success. Advice for growing a loyal audience as a video podcast. I would listen to the first episode of 2020 was with a man named, or was it 2021? One of the first episodes of one of those years was with a guy named Rob Maurer, Maurer. He has a podcast called Tesla Daily, where he has both an audio podcast and a video podcast. And his video podcast is taken off because the Tesla community lives on YouTube. And so his podcast is kind of taken off there. And so I would listen to that because he talks a lot about not just how he got started, but how he's growing that show and how he's doing it. Understanding YouTube is very, very important if you're going to be on YouTube as far as thumbnails and titles and the algorithm and all that stuff. That's what I'm thankful for with podcasting is you don't have to worry about that. With podcasting, it's can you create content that's worth spreading, right? Can you involve word of mouth in some way as opposed word of mouth is your algorithm, right? A human's brain is your algorithm on podcasting versus like the actual algorithm of YouTube. So just keep that in mind. Let's see. Filmtopia. If I know my end goal is to be a dual video platform and audio podcaster, similar to how MKBHD approaches his waveform podcast. So he has his main channel and then he has a specific podcast, but also films that. Should I commit to podcasting with a video audience in mind early on? I would. I would. It's going to add a few more challenges because you'll have to set up the video on top of the audio and understand how YouTube works again. But if you know that that's the direction you want to go and you want video to be like the primary driver, then yes. And you can use those people as sort of inspiration versus audio first, then kind of taking clips and putting them on YouTube. From Jackie, what do you think of Pod Page? It could be like a pre-launch to capitalize on excitement momentum, but also to help me to get to the listeners and encourage two-way open dialogue. So this is the idea of creating like a wait list or some sort of landing page to get people excited about an upcoming launch. As the ladies here know, I'm very big on picking a date, right? Like pick a date. This is the launch of your show because that's going to encourage you to get started. But that could also encourage your listeners to get ready for when your podcast comes out. And if you could engage in conversations, Jackie, beforehand, you can start to understand, well, what kinds of things are these people interested in so that you can have more guests on your show later that are in tune with your future audience that are going to be there. What do they like about existing podcasts that they listen to? What do they not like about existing podcasts that they listen to so that you can inject those things that are good into your show? But whether it's a pod page, which is a particular brand, or like a ConvertKit landing page or anything, I think setting up shop somewhere to get people to know, and maybe it just starts with your friends and family, but then kind of can go out from there. And if you have a website, obviously include that there too. If you can let people know it's coming, that's great. You don't want to launch a podcast. I teach this in the course. You don't want to launch a podcast like you have it all ready and it's ready to go, and then you let people know about it. You want to let people know about it ahead of time. And when you launch, as you'll see in the course, I want you to launch with a few episodes, not just one. You don't sell tickets to an event because you're going to play guitar and you play one song and leave the stage and then have people come back the next week. You have a few songs in your set that you want to play and that gets people excited. Let's see. Let's keep going here. Question from Anne. Can you break down percentage of time spent in different categories of prep, recording, post-production, research, writing, etc.? It's going to be different for everybody, but I would say a majority of people's time, and Kelly and Deanne, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's likely going to be in the editing phase of a podcast. Kelly, is that true for you? Or I know you do a lot of research too, so maybe that takes up a bit of time.
Yeah, and my episodes are pretty much scripted, so they're very clean. My editing is really, really minimal because I knew that scripting it would save me so much time on the back end.
Right.
And I personally deal with dyslexia terrible, so I really need to have it spelled out for me, or I knew I would trip and fumble. So it works for me.
Awesome. That's great. Noon, where's the majority of your time spent with your podcasting stuff?
Honestly, it's probably just racking my head around marketing and trying to sort of reach, growing the community really, because I'm having conversations that are generally between an hour and 90 minutes. I do some light editing, but my editing is pretty sparse.
Mm-hmm.
And then most of the time it's just like, cursing Instagram algorithms in my sleep.
Thank you. Yeah, majority of mine used to be editing, and then I offloaded that. And now a majority of my time is building relationships so that I can have these incredible guests on the podcast. And that's where I want to spend my time. And, you're not going to get to where you want to be up front, but at least knowing where you want to go, you can sort of lead into that. Maybe you start handing off just parts of your post-production, or you hand off the research, or whatever it is that you don't like to do, so that you can do more of your zone of genius. All right, a few more questions here. The Potter discussion says, question, how might I extend the length of my Harry Potter discussion podcast episodes? I feel like I can deliver more value, but can't quite find the right way to do it. So a number of ways that people extend, like if you feel like they're just cutting short, is you could go into a conversation with somebody by having a guest on. Typically, those lend itself to more time. I would say that perhaps it can be instead of just a particular single point that you talk about in an episode, it could be a listicle, right? The top 5 blank about Harry Potter that I love, the top 5 Easter eggs that you didn't know existed in Sorcerer's Stone, right? Boom. Like now I'm listening, you can cover each one, and you can put like the best one to last, but then your second best one's first, and all that kind of stuff. So again, the other thing about this is, do you need to extend the time? You don't necessarily need to extend time just to extend time. What if you just gave like the best 5 minutes about Harry Potter anybody's ever heard? Are you going to say, well, I need to add 25 minutes more because it's not a half hour? No, you just leave it at that. It's the highest value. Now people can go and talk about it and share it, right? So the time of a show is as much time as it needs to be to do what you want it to do. That's when people ask me, how long should my episodes be? That's always my answer.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Speeding through from JF. Is there oversaturation of podcasts in any specific area? No. And the reason, there might be many podcasts, but there is never an oversaturation of quality content. Let me say that one more time. There's never an oversaturation of quality content. And in fact, when you find a quote unquote oversaturated market, that likely means it's going to be easier to find what does work in that space. And if you enable yourself to focus more on what does work, then it's obviously going to work out better. There's not an oversaturation of diversification. There's not an oversaturation of inclusivity, right? So there's a lot of ways to approach this, not just because there's a number of them, but because of what the quality is what's going to matter most. And secondly, is there an average number of podcasts most people listen to on any given topic? If all of you who are watching the chat right now could mention how many podcasts you're subscribed to right now, do that in the chat. Around the horn really quick, Noan, how many podcasts are you subscribed to currently?
Maybe 15.
15. Dan?
Yeah.
About 10.
10. Kelly?
Yeah, only 4 or 5.
Yeah, it's more on the lower end for me. I actually had to cut out my listening so I could get more stuff done. But as you'll find in the chat, the numbers are quite high, which is really great because that means you have less to worry about in terms of competition, meaning you don't have to replace somebody else's playlist. You can just be added to it. And that's great because you can come up with something new and exciting, and people can start listening to you without the worry of, well, I have to kick another podcast out in order to come in. Obviously, you still have to create something of value, but yeah. Let's see. How important is mailing list, and what's the most effective way to utilize it? As in, what do you write? How often do you send out emails? Is it better than social media? I'd recommend going to 100emails.com. Email is different than social media. Social media is very public. Email is very private. But where I feel like people get email wrong is that when they use it just for broadcasting, it's like, hey, everybody, like, let me have your attention. Look at me and this thing I have to say, versus, hey, what's going on in your life? Hit reply. Let's have a conversation. And when you're just starting out, that's the best way to use emails, to have it in a conversational manner. Yes, you should still use it to broadcast and announce things because people are following you and subscribe for a particular reason. But in most cases, using it as a conversation device to have conversations about what a person's struggling with and what their challenges are is going to be really great. Collecting emails from a podcast can be an interesting challenge, but by providing a lead magnet or some sort of quick one-page PDF that offers some quick value up front can be easily offered in exchange for a podcast or for an email, so that you can get a person's email and have these conversations. But 100emails.com will help you get to 100 emails within 72 days. That's our little challenge to help you do that. And you just get 1 email a day and we'll help you through that.
72 hours.
Oh, 72 hours. Yes. Thank you.
72 days.
72 days would take too long. But 72 hours. Thank you, Noan. Noan, if you could do me a favor and let Matt know that I'm going to be a little bit late to the meeting that I'm supposed to have with him right now. I want to make sure I get to as many questions as I can. That'd be super fantastic.
You got it.
And thank you so much. And as I'm here talking my butt off, I'd love to share that Power Up Podcasting is available for everybody right now. Sorry, hold on. I lost my screen. There we go. Click the wrong button. So Power Up Podcasting is available right now at $200 off for basically the next 24 hours. After that, price goes back up and you lose out on that opportunity. You can lock it in now. smartpassiveincome.com/pup is the place to go. And that's where you want to go check that out. And hopefully you can get in. Lots of great comments coming in. We have people with 20 or more podcasts. That is insane. But yes, we're doing awesome. And we're almost at the end here. Let's see. Just Cash says, are trends important to follow and keep on top of when being on a platform? It seems everyone is looking for the next big thing. What advice do you have for those trying to keep up? Knowing what the trends are, I think, is important, but knowing when to say no is even more important, right? Understanding what makes sense for you and understanding what makes sense for your audience is really key. But you can take advantage of these trends. If, for example, the Olympics are trending very soon here because we have the Winter Olympics coming up. I feel like we just saw the Olympics, but that was the Summer Olympics. But it only feels like yesterday, doesn't it? I don't know. Time is weird right now. If you have any content that you can put into the world of the Olympics, maybe you're in fitness, right? And you have a podcast about fitness. Well, for the next 2 weeks, I'm going to go over an Olympian style fitness plan and show you what that's actually like so that we can see and appreciate just how much work these amazing people are putting into this, right? That would be a really amazing show that taps into a trend that's happening right now that still provides value, right? So that's one way to take advantage of these trends in a way and almost kind of what's called news jack or trend jack, as they call it sometimes, right? So for you, Kelly, I mean, whatever seems to be really popular in pop culture, it might be interesting to every once in a while do an episode about those and the history of that really popular thing, right? Like if, I don't know, Beanie Babies come back for whatever reason, you just like, let's dive hard into that and understand it and maybe chat about how it might die again or it might stay. That would be a really, really interesting thing. So there's that. But there's also trends like, hey, everybody's on TikTok now. Should I be on TikTok? I'm just going to do it because everybody else is on there. Do it because you know you can provide value there, not just because everybody else is doing it, right? But it's worth exploring, but just like dropping everything else to go for it is not the right way. Let's see. Filmtopia, if I post 2 episodes a week, one is a regular scheduled episode with topics, but the other is interviewing guests, does that work? Or should those 2 live on separate podcasts? I think they should live on the same podcast, especially if they're for the same audience. You mix it up a little bit. It allows for people to have an opportunity to get more of you into their ears. I think they should just live on the same one. Managing 2 podcasts is not 2 times as hard. It's more. It's like having kids. When you have a second kid, it's like 10 times as hard, not 2 times as hard. Hafoto says, what do you do? Thank you for the super chat again, Hafoto. What do you do for yourself to help with mental health and keeping your best face forward? Do you have a sort of pre-show ritual habits that you get into podcasting? This is a great one to maybe go around the horn because we probably all have different rituals or things we do prior to getting on the microphone, because you got to bring some energy. It can be difficult if you especially don't have energy. So Kelly, why don't we start with you and then go to Deanne as far as like, what do you do prior to recording to ensure that you bring your best self forward?
Well, it's literally very physical for me. I want to do lots of stretching and getting myself revved up, almost like I'm going on stage. I want to bring that good energy. So
I love it. So a lot of physical work. How about you, Deanne?
That's right.
I really just make sure that I'm prepared for it. And even though my interview style is very casual, I like to have all my facts in front of me. And that's really important. So definitely that.
There you go. How about you, Noan?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I like to approach conversation is be as present as possible without being prescriptive in the slightest. So I try to meditate a little bit, get into my body, some deep breathing. I usually hold a little rock in my hands, a soft jade that feels good. It's kind of tactile thing that kind of grounds me a little bit, but just trying to ground myself a bit.
That's great. For me, I do literally push-ups right before. I know Michael Hyatt has a trampoline, like one of those little like small ones in his office. He jumps before a podcast just to get the blood flowing. And I think that's really interesting, but everybody's different. You know, this is like the opposite of meditation, but it works for every individual, right? And I love that. So you have to, as you go along, find out what works for you. I also think it helps to know your body a little bit. Like I know that, for example, if I eat a lot, I'm not going to be very productive. So I choose when I eat a lot to not be right before I have to do something that's going to require a lot of brain power and things like that, right? And everybody is different. Yeah. Question from Mo, is video podcasting superior over audio only? No, there are pros and cons. I mean, there obviously with video, you have access to YouTube and seeing somebody does something to make a connection, and then you have the algorithm. But audio podcasts are so deep, and they can really, really connect with somebody even more than a video, because on a video platform, you're also distracted by what's next and recommended viewing and ads and all these other things. With a podcast, it's like the most intimate thing, because literally you're in a person's ear in their lives when they're in a car by themselves or on a walk or on travel. It's one of the most beautiful ways to build and scale a relationship is through podcasting. So is it superior? There are superior things about video that are over audio, and there are superior things about audio that are over video, in my opinion. Okay, let's see. You guys are doing great. Fantastic. Let's see. We are closing in. Hey, Pat, who is a podcast not for? I asked because I'm a podcast editor, and I reached out to my local chamber with a presentation, and they were not interested, which was frustrating and disappointing. Yeah, I mean, podcasting isn't for everybody. It is something that, does take a little bit of time and work. And I think a lot of people are scared about the technology part of it. I know I was when I first started, and we talked about that earlier with Kelly and Deanne about just the techie part of it. But honestly, once it's set up, it's ready to go, which is the nice thing. You don't have to continue to deal with that. And a lot of times, especially, I mean, if you're talking to the Chamber of Commerce, it's like the pitch isn't about podcasting. It's about, well, what is this going to do once the podcast is up, right? And what will this do for us? Like, it's like with a course, right? I mean, we're selling this course right now, by the way, Power Up Podcasting, smartpassiveincome.com/pup. People don't want the course. Nobody wants to buy this course. They want to buy the results of what this course will offer them. They want to buy the transformation. They want to buy the convenience of it. It's not about the course. It's about what it offers them. So in selling a podcast as an editor to a Chamber of Commerce, for example, it's not about the podcast even. It's about what is this going to unlock for them that they cannot get anywhere else, right? So that is a thought, perhaps, that might help you. Scott says, and thank you for the super chat, Scott. I'm a 50-year-old truck driver. I want to start a podcast bridging a change in nutrition, which saved my life. Wow. And public policy towards the subject. I don't have anything to sell. How do you monetize that? Well, in the course, we have 4 different ways to monetize that I talk about, but I'll uncover them really quick. Number 1, sponsorships and advertising, right? You don't have to sell anything to do that. You essentially just rent space on your audio show to companies who want to get in front of the same audience. And yes, it benefits you the more listeners you have. And it is a little bit more of a struggle at the start because you have no listeners. But more and more companies, again, are understanding the importance of the relationship between podcaster and podcast listener, and how powerful that is. And so even if you don't have a large audience, if you have a loyal audience, that's going to be worth a lot to a lot of companies for sure. I would just say be careful, because you could obviously get jaded by the income that could come in from ads. And then all of a sudden you have this podcast about, food and nutrition, but you're also promoting something that maybe doesn't align, right? And so you want to make sure you're always conscious about that. And then secondly, you could monetize through affiliate marketing. You might not have a product, but there might be products out there that your target audience would prefer or love. And again, making sure that those fit are important. But affiliate marketing is great because you don't need to create the products. They already exist. You just become the person who recommends them. Then, of course, you could use the audience that you build to create a product and understand what it is that they want, and whether that product is, it could be whatever. You have to ask your audience what they might want, but it could be a software. It could be a book. It could be a course. It could be coaching. It could be something else. And then finally, there is a very popular way a lot of podcasters and YouTubers are making money now, which is a Patreon account or Patreon model, which is sort of a PBS paid for by viewers like you. The fans will want to support you because they love what you're doing. And it's not like a tip jar, because you do give something in return. It might be a call with you once a month for all the people who pledge $10 a month, for example. And I know some people who are making 5 figures with just fan support through models like that, which is really interesting. Cool. Okay. We are closing in. Okay. Kay says, hello, I'm the main host of the Gray podcast. After viewing my analysis, my pod has been heading towards relationship guru from requests. I wanted to focus on comedy. How to avoid this? Oh, interesting. So the audience is asking for something that maybe necessarily wasn't what you thought it was. I think it's important to listen to them, but it doesn't necessarily mean you need to change just for them. I think you could do a couple things. You could combine the two things. You could also have an episode a month that talks more on that topic because people love it. And you kind of do want to offer something that your audience will love, but you also want to stay true to you and stay focused on what lights you up. So I hope that helps. And you mentioned niching down a lot. Have you ever seen too niched a podcast? I've seen a wooden boat podcast. I've seen a raising goats podcast. I mean, hypothetically, you could be too niched, right? Like the 4 women over 50 who have golden retrievers who live in the San Fernando Valley podcast, right, is maybe a little bit too niche. But even then, I mean, there are local podcasts that serve their own communities, right? So no, but yes, you could get to that point. Okay, let's take 2 more questions. I'm going to take it from JF. Is there oversaturation of podcasts in any specific area? Is there another? We already answered that question. Boom. That was easy. And let's see. Question from Wendy. Wendy, thank you. When will you offer the next bootcamp style course for podcasting? No, that is a great question. It is something that we're definitely exploring. The bootcamp is 3 to 4 times more the price, but it is something where you do get access to us for 6 to 8 weeks, and you get office hours that are dedicated just to those students on top of the office hours that we already offer and that kind of thing. But we'll let you know when that happens, but it is planned, but it is not on the calendar yet. Right now, the big focus is offering Power Up Podcasting, smartpassiveincome.com/pup. If you want to check that out, the deal ends tomorrow, $200 off. And I hope this was helpful. I hope this answered a lot of your questions. I want to give a big shout out to our guests here today, known from SPI Media, and also thank you to Kelly and Deanne. And Kelly and Deanne, one more time, we'll start with Kelly. Where can people go to listen to your podcast? And again, thank you for being a student and one who took action and is now seeing some results from the work that you've done. And if you happen to have anything nice that you might want to say about Power Up Podcasting, I won't stop you.
Well, I attribute all of my success to this point to you. You gave me the courage, you gave me the confidence. So thank you so much. You made it easy for me. But I'm Crazy Good Vintage. You can find me on most podcast platforms or on crazygoodvintage.com.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And Deanne.
And I agree with Kelly. You have provided such amazing content. I can't even imagine where I'd be if I hadn't gone through the course. And I've also done heroic online courses, just kind of a plug for that. Yeah. Awesome. I love everything, Pat. So you'll hear a lot of references actually sometimes in my podcast about, well, Pat Flynn said, and so it's kind of something my family and friends are used to hearing also.
That's so funny.
Yeah. So yeah, really. I'll hear from them later. But yeah, you can find me on alopecialife.com, and I'm on all podcasting platforms as well at Alopecia Life.
Thank you so much. And Known, your podcast, where can people go and listen?
Yeah, it's You, Me, Empathy, anywhere podcasts. And then my main home base is the Feely Human Collective at feelyhuman.co.
Awesome. Thank you all for your time and attention today. I hope you can explore getting in the course and taking advantage of this deal. smartpassiveincome.com/pup. Take care, everybody. And we'll see you on the flip side and maybe in the course too. Cheers. Thank you, Kelly. Thanks, Dan.